Tent.
Good afternoon, Ms. Grant.
Good afternoon.
No, Mr. Megan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Grant. I wonder if we can look at the action plan itself now. So that's bundle 20, document 48, page 794.
Is this the
The 27-point action plan.
Right.
Because what I thought I'd do is effectively, I'll not ask you to answer this question yet, but I'll come back to it at the end, which effectively amounts to this, is that how do you respond to the idea that the way that the issues are addressed in the action plan should have required you as Chief Executive to act? And I'll come back to that at the end when I go through it, but I want to give you, as it were, notice of the question that's to come. But while we do it, I wondered when you would have seen this. In 2017?
Yes.
Yeah. And are there any of the particular 27 items that stood out for you at the time?
I don't remember. What we were trying to do was make sure that we're all being actioned, and some of them were short term, some of them had been done, and some of them were more major.
Yes, indeed, and that's what I wanted to pick up with you is. I think I had planned to ask you in respect to question 1 or 2, which is item 1 and 2, which is relates to the PPVL rooms, and whether you spoke to Mr. Loudon about why these happened at the time. Is there any particular reason did you speak to Mr. Loudon about why the PPVL rooms were not compliant with SHTM or weren't appropriate for infectious diseases patients?
I think it was part of that general conversation that I've described to you already.
Right.
We didn't go through the action plan in detail, or at least if we did, I don't recall it.
Let's go to item 6, and it is the issue, as recorded by whoever wrote the action plan, is HEPA filters in PICU for the protection of patients in the bone marrow treatment unit that might need critical care during treatment. The BMTU is also referred to as Ward 2A. And do you see the current position is HEPA filters were installed within PICU Ward 2A week commencing 6th November 2017, with room numbers 12 and 17 previously installed within room 18. HEPA filters still be fitted in room 5, access to be agreed with clinical colleagues. And HEPA filters also fit into Children's Hospital Ward 3C, commencing 13 November 2017 within rooms 9 and 10. Now, given that we're more than 2 years since the hospital opened, should that fact that HEPA filters were being fitted then not have alerted you to the suggestion that problems weren't being addressed by the existing management structure? Because it took 2 years for this issue to be addressed.
So I really can't answer that because I don't know what the circumstances and the context around that would be. If it's as yes, clearly there should have been, if there was issues that were raised in 2015 when the hospital was opened, and there were issues and there had been some impact on patients and so on, then yeah, clearly they should have been dealt with before that. But I don't know enough about the detail of this. I don't.
But if we just think of it this way, if it's the case, I'm taking this from this document, that somebody thought, you know what, we should now fit these HEPA filters in 2017, then isn't one of the possibilities that no one had thought of that issue or addressed it, you don't know which, in the previous 2 years? Doesn't that require some greater level of action on your part as Chief Executive when you see that it hasn't been done? in the previous 2 years.
So I think we're going back to the questions I spoke about in the morning. You know, I would expect others to deal with this. You know, we had a big team of people. I totally understand if things are being raised that are of substance, but the role of a chief exec is to empower others to do things as well as take action on serious things. So I don't recall the detail of what was discussed around that, and I don't recall the reasons why it had taken so long. So I don't want to conjecture about why it wasn't done, why it wasn't, because I don't actually know.
I think the point that the reason I'm raising it is the question is, when does an issue become sufficiently serious that the chief executive has to step in and say, no, you need to act and do something else other than follow the existing processes?
I guess that depends on the seriousness of the issue. And the whole reason for pulling together the action plan was some of the things in the action plan had either been dealt with, is my understanding, or they should have been dealt with at a much lower level in the organisation, and indeed probably were. And some others were much more complicated. And therefore, Dr. Armstrong rightly pulled together a meeting to try and differentiate the things that were important, and asked, I think, the infection control team to I think it was the infection control manager to keep a grip of this to make sure that things were done. But some of those things that were in the action plan were relatively modest, shall I call it that, and some of them were more major. But those things were getting dealt with. So, yeah, the action plan was highlighted to me, and we did discuss the fact that it was all happening, and our focus was on trying to resolve things. In terms of I was just thinking at lunchtime about your point about the DMA reports, and in some ways, when we got the reports, it was about moving forward as well. It wasn't about how. In some ways, it was about, you know, the history, but actually, this was about, from where we are now, what is it we need to do to move forward and get these things sorted.
But if we look at page 3, we go forward 2 pages to item 17. One more page, which is the 3 air change things. And the current position is there are 3 air changes in a single room within both Queen Elizabeth and the Children's Hospital. Director of Facilities agreed to take this forward with NHS D&G. What's NHS D&G?
Dumfries and Galloway, who had just bought a new hospital as well. I assume that's what that means.
Yeah.
With single rooms in it.
How do you respond to the suggestion that the some of these things, not all of them, I'd accept that, but some of these things are actual examples of failures to manage the ventilation system that are effectively the same sort of failures as are eventually found in the DMA Canyon report? Because the DMA Canyon report shows a failure to manage risk in particular discrete ways. But here we have a failure to manage issues that later emerge. And what I'm wondering is, should this action plan have not prompted you to take similar actions and investigate these key issues, particularly ones around ventilation?
So I think I have answered, as best I can, I've answered that. We were trying to move forward rather than saying, how did this happen? I've explained to you that I had a conversation with David Loudon, who and I've explained that already, so I'll not repeat it. And also, what's the outcome? What's the impact of that? Because as I said to you, I initially thought, oh well, this is simple, just turn up the thing and it'll be fine. And clearly that wasn't the case, because it wasn't a matter of saying, well, actually, if you just do X, then this will all be fixed. It was, if you go to look at what happened to A2B, it was a massive, massive undertaking to actually change all that. So there has got to be a risk assessment of what's the impact to patients, and therefore what is it we can reasonably do to address that issue, or indeed do we need to address that issue because there are other mitigating things in place.
Was there a risk assessment of the item in row 17, the 3 air changes?
We were looking at the outcomes. Was there?
But you've just told me that you would look at it, discuss it, and get a risk assessment as an example, and you didn't get a risk assessment for item 17.
I was just trying to answer your point. what we were looking at was what was the outcome in terms of the infection rates and what the impact had been, right? And whether there was any impact on patients, and also the areas which were the biggest focus was around the specialist ventilation rather than the general wards where it wasn't the same kind of issue.
How do you know that? At this point, how do you know it's not the same kind of issue?
Because the patients in the areas with specialist ventilation are either immunocompromised or they have particular characteristics.
I appreciate this, but in the general wards, which includes a wide range of patient groups, but doesn't include, well, it does actually include the immunocompromised patients in Ward 2A, but apart from them, the general community of the hospital are all in these rooms. Why do you know that it's not an issue in terms of patient safety?
The risk was perceived to be less.
By whom?
By, I think, everyone.
There's no risk assessment has been done. There's no discussion of that in this report or action plan. Who assesses the risk that this poses? I appreciate now we have the debate with Mr. Hoffman and all that. Appreciate that now, but back then, what steps were taken by the health board to reach that conclusion that it was a different order of risk? I'm
sure there would have been a discussion about where we should focus our efforts and where I can't remember the discussion. I just can't. So
I want to go through to the next page, and look at two water-related things. So this is 21 and 22, and it's another question about when you learn something. So 21 relates to cleaning of temperature control valves. I suppose this is probably the horn taps. When did you learn that there had been a discussion before the hospital opened about using these horn taps and the risks they might pose?
Probably as part of this. I don't remember exactly when I knew it, but I did. Right. In recent time, I'm not saying recent times, but I have been briefed on that.
Would you have known about it before the DMA Canyon report arrived?
I'm not certain, to be honest, because the water issues really only came to my attention in terms of the seriousness of some of those issues when the DMA Canyon reports and when we were looking into the issues in 2018.
Yes, because I think the point that's made about these taps is they're fitted widely across the hospital, and there is a meeting in March 2015. Sometimes we get that right. Sorry, 2014. Thank you, my lord. I'm assuming you wouldn't have seen that minute or anything at the time. No. But we understand from evidence that the maintenance of those doesn't really start until 2018. So it's not actually in place at this point.
In 2017?
Yeah.
I didn't comment on that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so we then have a statement at 22, water testing is not as per national guidance, and the response, board water safety is in place and water systems processes are monitored as per national guidance. Was that actually true at the time, knowing what you now know about the water management in the DMA Canyon reports?
My understanding is that was a particular thing about the water testing, and that the water testing was being done.
No, I get that, but someone has written in here, board water safety is in place and water systems and processes are monitored as per national guidance. What I'm putting to you is that what the DMA Canyon reports, both of them are saying, is that not actually strictly correct, because there weren't, for example, authorized persons and authorizing engineers.
I guess if you go to the issue, water testing is not as per national guidance. My understanding is that we believe that it was.
No, I very much accept that. I'm not saying that because there wasn't much guidance around at the time, and that's part of the point. But somebody has written in here and told you, and whoever else reads the report, that water systems and processes are monitored as per national guidance. And what you will later discover in the DMA Canyon report is that's not the complete picture. Yes. And I wonder if you noticed that.
I think we were focused on the water testing.
Right. Now, in your questionnaire, we asked you some questions about being duty holder for the board.
Yes.
And so that's question 63, which is on page 75. In 17 and 18, what did you know about your responsibilities as a duty holder for the water matters in terms of L8 and HSD 278 and SHTMO 401?
I had a general high level awareness of the duty holder responsibilities, but there are many, many similar responsibilities on a chief executive.
Yes. And did you appoint somebody as a responsible person?
I assumed they were already in place. Because when you come to a new role, if you couldn't really check in a board that size or in any board, it's a chief exec level, that every single bit was in place. You assume that as the hospital had been open for 2.5 years, that those things were in place. And in fact, in the majority of the board area, my understanding is they were in place.
So you very much assumed that these roles were being properly carried out, and they were in post, and there were people in place.
I think it's, in hindsight, then that's a different thing. But I think in general terms, there are many, many areas within the board where there are equivalent of duty holders.
Yes.
And when you come into a new role, it would be very difficult to check every single thing to make sure it was in place. But because there are many, many, many things in that line.
I mean, thinking, again, I get with the benefit of hindsight, because now, since the water incident, there's been a high level of water testing by Greater Glasgow and Clyde. We've heard the evidence of Mr. Kelly and Mr. Clarkson and Professor Steele on that subject. We've had Mr. Poplar's audit. So we know things are different now. But what lessons do you derive from what will turn out to be what was found in the DMA Canyon reports and things in terms of the management of the duty holder responsibility? How would you encourage other duty holders to act differently, if at all?
Yeah, I think there needs to be some kind of recognition of how to make sure that the principal issues have visibility and have an appropriate status in the organisation, if I could call it that. But there, as I say, there are many, many, many of them for a chief executive. So I think there are issues about when you're going onto a new site to make sure that the processes that one would assume are in place are actually there.
Yes, because when we look at the ward safety, the board safety group minutes from 15 and 14, they're not discussing those sort of aspects of the new building. Who's going to be the appointed person, who's going to be the authorising engineer? They don't discuss that. So you feel there should be some system of pushing that up the visibility, as it were, so more people can see it.
I guess there needs to be a more structured approach to make sure that some of those, that all of those issues are up.
However, there has been some evidence from, I think, mainly Mr. Parry, but Mr. Purdon as well, I think, and some of the other members of the team about lack of resourcing in estates in the years after handover, including in 17 and 18. Were you aware of their concerns at the time? Lack of staff to do the work?
No, I don't think I was. Subsequently, there had been some discussion about the volume of work, and in 2018, yes, when there was issues about, why were the DMA reports not actioned, then there was discussion about, there was a review, a discussion about why those issues had not been addressed, and then there was discussion about that the number of snagging incidents, if I could call them that, were very significant in that period immediately after the hospital had been opening, and therefore had been very difficult for estate staff.
So do you think there should have been more resource made available to them?
Well, I wasn't there, so I don't know.
But even in the period you were chief executive, do you think there should have been more resource in 17 and 18?
I think the snagging issues were greater than had been anticipated, and I think that put huge pressure onto the system.
But in the period you were chief executive in 17, 18, do you think there should have been more resource for estates in the Queen Elizabeth?
What what we did was there was some discussion about whether there was enough resource, and we asked, as you know, Jim Leaper to come in and look at how some of those issues and what we need to do to address them. And we also looked at some of the work where some of it could be done by external contractors and so on, and how we use the in-house staff and how we used external contractors to make sure that the breadth of the work was covered.
But in the period between you arriving and the Chief Executive and Mr. Leaper's report, do you think there was enough resource in estates?
I couldn't answer that. I mean, no one came to my office and said there really is not enough resource. That was. But
looking at Mr. Leaper's conclusions, do you think that's a reasonable inference that there wasn't enough resource provided?
I think it's a reasonable inference that in the period following the occupation of the hospital, if I could call it that, then there was a lot of snagging, and therefore they were under pressure, and one couldn't really say whether there was enough resource or not because I wasn't there. I don't know. In 17-18, things had calmed down a bit, and therefore there was no issues raised with me about we need more resource.
I understand that, Ms. Grant, but I'm wondering whether, looking back on what you now know, having read Mr. Leaper's reports, having considered the reasons that he understood the DMA Canyon work wasn't actioned, that you might be able to help me about whether in 17 and the first half of 18 there was enough resource provided to the estates team at Queen Elizabeth.
No reason to believe there wasn't. I do think there was a lot of pressure on them, and we had tried to support them by putting some of the some resource into external contractors and so on.
Thank you. I want to move on now to the stage 2 whistleblower. When did you? Well, let's look at your answer in question 32. That's page 46. You are asked when you first became aware of the stage 2 whistleblower by Dr. Redding, and you were told in February 2018. Am I right? Who would you have heard that from? Is it from Dr. Redding or is it from someone else?
I think it was from Dr. Redding, but I think it was from. I can't remember exactly who.
So her evidence is that she communicates with you in 17.
Yeah.
But in 18, she looks up the policy.
Yes.
And she emails Dr. de Caystacker, who's the person she's supposed to email.
Yes.
And so would you have heard about it from Dr. Caystacker or Dr. Armstrong or someone like that?
Probably. Yes.
Now
I certainly did know about it.
Yeah, you knew about it. So explain. We asked when you saw the report, and you say it would not be routine practice for the Chief Executive to see whistleblowing reports, and I understand that. And you were kept abreast of the issues by the Medical Director and the Chief Operating Officer and was aware of the issues involved. I cannot recall precisely when I saw the report. We asked you about the need, about what you knew about the reporting, the investigation. And over the next page on 34, we asked you, as Chief Executive, what steps you took to keep us informed of future whistleblowers and the concerns that were raised. And you say it's not normal practice for a Chief Executive to have sight of the details of the whistleblowing reports due to the need for confidentiality for those involved. I would get a monthly summary of ongoing items and any summary recommendations, but would not generally see the reports in full to ensure the confidential process is retained. Now, I appreciate that's the normal policy, but why was there any need for confidentiality in this case?
No, there. I need to say this without talking about confidentiality, if you know what I mean. There have been other incidents of whistleblowing where issues have been raised, and people have specifically asked for them to remain confidential.
I understand that.
No, but even associated with this kind of stuff. So
yeah,
it's really important that people feel supported to make comment without feeling that they have to be identified or their content needs to be identified.
But you knew that Dr. Redding and colleagues had raised the stage 1, or whatever it was called at the time, and you knew that Dr. Redding had raised the stage 2.
Yes.
So in that sense, it wasn't confidential anymore.
Yeah, I guess so, but we were dealing with issues. So it's not, I mean, whistleblowing in itself in terms of the process is mean, it's back to this thing. The processes we're working, Linda DeCasca is an experienced whistleblowing person and to investigate those things. That's the process, and she would have dealt with it. So I wouldn't go along and say I want to know exactly what Dr. Redding has said and so on. That's not.
So Dr. Redding, in very high level, was not satisfied with the work done in response to the SBAR. I think partly because she wasn't told.
Yes.
Looking at it with the benefit of hindsight, but she wasn't satisfied, so she raised it in the stage 2. Now, without getting into too much of the facts, if she's not satisfied with something, she's raising a concern about the way the people who should have dealt with it did deal with it. And those people would have been Dr. Armstrong, Mr. Loudon, Sandra Devine, the people who were at the meeting in October. So she's gone to stage 2 whistleblower to say, I'm not happy with this. And yet somehow it almost feels as if you're not listening. You're not listening as chief executive because you're the one above the people she's to some degree complaining about.
I wouldn't accept that. I think the issue was we were trying to make sure that those things were dealt with. I was reasonably assured that progress was being made, and that the issues were being treated seriously. The time frame wasn't huge between when the original thing was raised in this time frame. I appreciate there's now been discussion about it was much earlier than that, and therefore I was satisfied at that point that we were taking it seriously and that we were making progress with the issues that had been raised.
If we look at the report, which is Bundle 27, Volume 4, Document 6, page 81. And we look, now it's fair to say that Dr. Redding thinks she raised more than 5 points, but if we just look at the 5 points that are here, these focus on 5 of the 27 issues. And she's going to the hospital, the board, to say, I'm concerned these issues aren't being addressed. When did you find out she had these concerns?
I think it was all part of the continuum, if you know what I mean. Because those issues had been raised, were getting dealt with. And so I don't think, in my mind, they were separate, if you know what I mean. In the 2017 process, those things were getting addressed. And I knew she wasn't satisfied with that. And we had some conversation about how do we make sure that the progress is appropriate so they're not stalling. And I think that's...
Because it effectively her complaint is that these 5 issues are not being addressed, notwithstanding what's in the action plan. So she raises the issue, and then Dr. DeCasca investigates it. And I'm wondering when you were told the results of the investigation. Because the report ends, I think, in May. It's produced in May.
I can't remember. I'm sorry. I think we need to recognise as well that, you know, there was a sector director, there was chief operating officer, there was all these people as well. So some of this wasn't, and I don't want to sound as if I'm not interested or wasn't doing it, but there are a lot of people around me who were dealing with this. Yes, it wasn't a case of they weren't, they were.
Let's go back to Bundle 20, page 800, which is the people present at the 4th of October meeting. So let's look at the top half of the page. Effectively, the people you've just identified are the ones at the meeting. So she's complaining, for better or worse, whether she's right or wrong, that the issues that they have set out to address are not being addressed. And I'm suggesting that you're not listening.
I think, no, I think the issue that she was principally raising is that the pace wasn't quick enough and she didn't know what was going on. And so the issues were around, are we doing these things? Which of those things are we doing?
Yes.
Which of those can we never do because one of them was infeasible as I understand it?
Which one was infeasible?
The one about the ED department. I've forgotten which one it was, but there was one about a room in the ED department.
In the action plan?
Yes.
Yes.
But the rest of those issues were making progress and people were absolutely dealing with it. But if you look at those people, there are senior people there who were dealing with it. And I think if you look at the December meeting that we were looking at earlier, there was decent progress being made on a lot of the issues.
And to what extent do you think the whistleblower could have been avoided if there had been better communication with Dr. Redding about that progress?
That is possible.
Now, if we go back to the whistleblowing report, so that's 27 volume 4, page 81. Dr. de Caysecker describes speaking to a number of people, and that's on page 82. At 3. And I wondered to how many of these people you had spoken about the action plan by the time we get to February 2018.
The people I would have spoken to about the action plan would be the Chief Operating Officer, the Medical Director, and the Director of Estates and
So you wouldn't have spoken to these people? Okay. Now, what I want to ask you here is, what were you told about the conclusions of this whistleblowing report?
I don't remember. I'm sorry, I don't recall that. I mean, it was 8 years ago. I don't.
Well, ultimately, it went to a stage 3.
Yes.
And then, whilst you were chief executive, Dr. Redding gave evidence about it as public inquiry. So
Yes.
I just wondered if at any point you'd remembered what you were told about the conclusions of her stage 2 whistleblowing.
The discussion that I recall was around, are we dealing with the things that were in the action plan? Are we content that the progress is being made? And are there any that are really not possible? And I was assured that the actions were being taken, we were making good progress with them, the ones that were possible, and that the governance was going through things like the Clinical Care Governance Committee to make sure that these issues were getting dealt with. And there is evidence of that.
If we look at the findings, there's discussion of Dr. de Caysecker's investigation results. How much of these would you have seen in terms of finding?
Where are we now? Sorry.
Bottom of page 82, section 4. It goes on for a page and a half. How much of this would you have seen?
That bit about the 3 sets of issues that you're asking me?
Yeah, well, anything from 4 findings onward. I'm just wondering how much of this document, in a sense, would you have been told about?
I would only have been generally told about the fact that the issues were part of the action plan and we were dealing with it.
So I wonder if that's really... Dr. Redding raised a bunch of issues with some colleagues and an action plan's produced. She contacts you, just so I rephrase that, she contacts the stage 2 process because she's concerned to some degree that some of them aren't being actioned on properly. It goes into a stage 2 process. You are told they are being actioned. So does, in fact, the stage 2 process just go back to the people she's complaining about?
No, Linda Casca was a independent, for the purpose of this conversation, person who was making a judgment who hadn't been involved in this. So she was making a judgment out with the people that you've described on that page.
Looking at her judgment, can we go to the bottom of page 83? She decided to include in her report criticisms of Dr. Peters' working style. These are the bullet points at the bottom. Would you expect that to be in a whistleblowing stage 2 report about a different member of staff?
Can I just read it for a second?
Please, of course.
The last paragraph, is that what we're talking
And the bullet points below it.
So I think when you write a report, I mean, what I would stress to you is that when things have been, when things have come to the fore, the main thing is to try and address some of the issues that are happening and think about how we move forward. And there were certainly some concerns about the style and tone of communication of some of our colleagues. And as part of that, you'd have to ask Linda why she put that in the report, but I think it's pertinent to say that we are supposed to be team players, and from that perspective, we have to, and it's back to the point of what is significant and what isn't, and how do we deal with that. And so it doesn't, the report should reflect Linda's view of what the main points are of the situation that she's doing the whistleblower for.
Why
So
are
if she
these?
thought that was pertinent, then that's why she put it in, I assume.
Why are these sections relevant to the issue raised by Dr. Redding in her stage 2 whistleblower? And I have asked Dr. DeCasa for her reasons.
Because I think they were impacting on how the whole discussion was going on in a wider sense, because it became at some times quite tense, and that didn't help matters in terms of moving the issues forward.
To what extent does including this sort of content in a stage 2 whistleblower report ultimately end up deterring whistleblowing? Because if you know you're going to be subject to personal criticisms, or your colleagues are, you might not raise an issue.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern, but I do think we need to try and portray the overall context of what was happening, as opposed to some of the conversation this morning, this afternoon, is about this part, but actually I think it's important to understand it in the context of the overall position and the overall issues that were getting dealt with at that time. So I do think it's, your point is one that is important, and as part of that we also need to, that's why some of the confidentiality issues are quite important as well, that people do not feel that in the public domain things are noted down.
So you don't feel that you should put in the public domain criticisms of whistleblowers then?
I think in general terms, that's why I was trying to link that to the confidentiality aspects of it. So it is difficult to, but it is sometimes difficult to do.
Can I take you to a letter that you wrote on the 1st of March 2021 to Professor Stevens, bundle 25, document 3, page 151, and we'll come back to the place this letter sits in the CNR tomorrow.
If I can interrupt, before we leave Dr. DeCasetter's report, I mean, the view might be taken that it's at very least remarkable that issues, which are summarized as the main points, which I don't think.
Should we go back to bundle?
Yes, sorry, my apologies. So that's going back to bundle 27,
Volume
4, document 6,
page 83.
Page 81.
Oh, 81, sorry, my lord.
Yeah, a report which is sets out as addressing the 5 points summarized, none of which mention Dr. Peters, ends up with conclusions and recommendations which are largely, if not exclusively, about Dr. Peters.
That list of bullet points, you mean?
Yes.
And then over on to page 84.
Yes, including page 84.
Yeah, so if we look at that, it's quite hard to do it in isolation, if you know what I mean. But basically, I think these reports are about trying to, while they are about answering the whistleblowers' concerns, they are also about trying to do a, I don't know the word, but dispassionate, shall we say, view of the situation and the factors that are leading to this. And undoubtedly, from that report, it looks as if those issues were being raised by colleagues about the behaviour of an individual, which was impacting on how to deal with the situation. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Obviously not.
Not immediately. I mean, the whistleblowing report, as I would understand it, is intended to give the reader a response to the issues raised by the whistleblower. This report identifies or summarizes the issues and then seems to become pretty well directed at something entirely different, and that's the behavior of not the whistleblower, but the person who happened to attend with the whistleblower.
Yes. I think it's part of the overall situation within which the whistleblower was sitting, in terms of the factors that are making it incredibly difficult to deal with some of these things, because they were getting dealt with, and then, but in some of these areas, more and more things were getting raised all the time. And so therefore, I think that statement, those statements that you have highlighted and Mr. McIntosh has highlighted, are trying to get the wider context of how difficult it was to make some progress in a sustained way. But I do understand the point of, well, why was that in there? And I think the other thing is, I'll go back to the confidentiality thing. That's why it's important. And in some whistleblowing reports, and I don't really see a lot of the detail of them, there are things that are difficult and for individuals, and we need to make sure that they are kept confidential. So I think they were trying to, I think Dr. DeCastro was trying to outline the overall context within which the things that Dr. Redding was raising were trying to be addressed. I think she was trying to confirm the complexity of the situation, or outline the complexity of the situation around those issues that were part of the whistleblower.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Paul. What I wanted to do is, you talked about confidentiality and keeping these matters confidential. We look at this letter that you wrote to Professor Stevens in 2021. It's on bundle 25, document 3, page 151. And I will go and do the context of this letter tomorrow when we deal with the case notes review. But if we go, it's the 1st of March 2021. If we go on to the final page.
Sorry, my fault, Mr. McIntosh. Could you give me the reference to
Yes, it's 25, document 3. The letter starts page 151. It's a letter of 1st March 21. And I'm taking Ms. Grant to the 3rd page, page 153, where there's a heading at the top of the page, anecdotal references, which I think is a reference to elements within the overview report, the draft one you've seen, that report the views of certain microbiologists that have been repeated to the CNR. Is that broadly the context here, Ms. Grant?
Well, the report talks in quite a lot of places about we have heard, or some people say, or some people feel, or whatever the words are. But it doesn't actually say, it could have been me, it could have been you, it could have been anyone. So it wasn't just specifically about any individual, but it was, because the report's not specific in some areas about who said it. What we were trying to get to was, as part of this whole process, there's been an awful lot of people saying, not just the whistleblowers, a lot of people, just generally, people who have said things, but there hasn't been evidence or investigation or whatever to support what they've said. So we were trying to get away from that I said and he said to what does the evidence show, and that's what that means.
And then you quote on the paragraph that begins, it reads a section that deals with we have seen evidence and its discussion of an issue in infection control. But then the bit that follows that, you say, we are of course unable to see this evidence. However, the review team should be made aware that several members of the IPCD said that in 2018, several members of the IPCT senior nursing team met with the Royal College of Nursing with the concerns about the behaviour of one microbiologist at QEUH. Now, why is that there? Is that not exactly the same as the thing Dr. De Caseck is doing?
I think it's trying to so in part of the whole general management process that we have in the board and in all the teams, it's not just about one individual, whether it be the docs or the nurses or whatever. It's about the whole team. And what we were trying to do was put this in the context of it's very difficult to operate in a professional and sensible manner if people are feeling under pressure and so on. And what we were trying to do is support the case note review team to actually understand the context within which this was operating, because the nursing staff particularly had felt that they were under serious pressure.
Who's your source for that information?
The nurse director.
That would be Mr. Vine.
No, the board's my nurse director at that time was Margaret.
Because the reason I raise that is because we have explored in evidence this matter. So it was raised in statements by Mr. Vine, and I also discussed it with Ms. Pritchard. And it seems to be in 2015. Were you aware of that?
When they raised the issue?
Yes.
No, I'm not aware of exactly, but it was to Madge Maguire rather than to the people that you've described.
I can show you the email. It's bundle 27, volume 11, document 11, page 70. We talked this through with Ms. Pritchard. So 27, 11, 11, 70. And it's a thread in 15, 16 September 2024, but the original email, if we keep going back to the bottom of this, down to the next page. Next page. Next. Do you see, here we are, 15th December 2015. To Lynn Pritchard from an IPC nurse. Christine Peters just phoned to ask we advise the staff in ITU caring for patients with RSV to wear surgical masks. Now, that's the issue that causes this incident that you refer to in your letter to Professor Stevens. And what I'm putting to you is that you've misinformed Professor Stevens and you've raised an event which is years before the events of the CNR.
So my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that there were issues raised during the time that I was the chief exec about. So I.
You don't think it's this?
I think this was probably part of it, but it was certain a part of the whole environment. Shall I put it like that? That's probably the wrong word in this inquiry, but you know what I mean. But I do believe there was issues raised later than that.
But do you feel, how would you respond to the suggestion that putting this into your response to Professor Stevens has the effect of discouraging people to raise issues with people like the Case Notes Review, because if you raise issues, someone like the Chief Executive will write and set out your flaws in public.
Yeah, I think it's important though for people to understand the context within which we're operating, because no one has said it was, you know, it's not a person wasn't named or so on. It's just, I think it's important that people understand the context was incredibly difficult, and the intensity of some of the dialogue was quite difficult, and therefore
No,
this
indeed,
is not all about.
and Dr. Peters has discussed that in evidence, and she's explained what she did and how it was dealt with at the time.
But
What I wanted to do, though, is
could I just
please continue.
Certainly, yes.
I think it's important that when we come back to this is about a team. So it's not the and you didn't say this, and I don't mean it the way it's going to sound. It's you know, the docs and the nurses need to work, and other colleagues need to work as part of a team. And so I think one of the characteristics of some of this is we need to respect the view of the estates guys, or not, and not in this case, but you know what I mean, or the nurses. The nurses actually are hugely important in this process. And as part of the conversation with Penelope Redding, for example, there was some comments about, you know, they weren't doing their job properly, or there was friction in the camp, shall we put it like that. So I think it's a bit about how do we actually look and see how we can respect the individual talents that people have and experience and so on, rather than it's a kind of them and us. And I don't think that's helpful. And I think some of that was difficult during those periods. And we all, whether you're the chief exec or anybody else, need to think about how to make sure you're getting the balanced view from a range of colleagues, rather than
Just one side.
yes, or just one person, or just one kind of cohort of people. I mean, in my time, as I described to you, when we were in the, you know, when I was lower down the organisation, it's really important that the doc, the nurse, the general manager, or whatever level it's at, or your estates colleagues or whatever, it's important that they have the opportunity to make a contribution and that it is listened to.
Well, can we look at Bundle 14, Volume 1? And it's within document 25, but it's actually at page 414. So this is a letter which I'm sure you never saw. And it's Dr. Peters' letter resigning from her role as sector ICD sector for South, although Mr. Walsh would want us to call it demitting office. Would you ever have been told that Dr. Peters had been raising these issues as far back as 2015, when the S-bar and then the stage 2 whistleblower going on?
Would I have been told that Dr. Peters was raising them?
Yes. So in 1718, when you're told about the S-bar and then the stage 2 happens, and you're discussing your concerns about the team dynamics and how how everyone felt, did someone ever tell you? I presume Dr. Armstrong, but it might have been Professor Jones. Did someone ever tell you that Dr. Peters has been raising the same issues since 2015?
I think as part of the dialogue around the 27 point, the S-bar and so on, there was a discussion about when did some of these issues emerge, where they dealt with, had they been fully dealt with as opposed to a bit of them dealt with, and so on. So I don't recall the exact conversation, but certainly as part of that 2017 discussion, it says, I think, in the action plan and in the S-bar that some of them have been raised for some time.
Okay. Let's go back to the stage 2 whistleblower and then finish that off and move on. The final issue is the question of whether you urge Dr. Redding not to whistleblow. Now, we asked you about this in question 35B. It's on page 48. And then we asked you in further details of 48B, which actually is found on page 50. So let's go to page 50. You've been a long answer, whistleblower. We've taken that all on board, but let's look at this paragraph B question. Dr. Redding has given evidence. She says staff were not encouraged to use the whistleblowing procedure prior to either stage 1 or stage 2. So I cannot recall which. I was urged not to whistleblow by Jane Grant. I recall her specifically saying to me that she urged me not to do it. So we asked you whether you accepted that position. And you've said in the next sentence, I received several emails from Dr. Redding between November 17 and January 18, raising a number of issues. And then you quoted from the emails of 24th November from Dr. Redding and your reply on the 29th of November. And then on the next page, you describe what's in the rest of your email, the 29th of November, through 2 paragraphs, ending, I would urge you to continue to work with Dr. Green, Professor Jones, as the board's interim lead ICD and your colleagues to seek an appropriate solution to these issues. Now, first question is that statement that you've quoted, I would urge you to continue to work with Dr. Green, etc., effectively an urge not to go to a stage 2 whistleblower?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
It was to try and, because at this point so there's a lot of issues raised by clinical staff or all staff a lot of times. And as part of that, it was nothing to do with that sentence was not about urging her to stop doing whistleblowing. If so, I would have said that. It was more about trying to work collectively with those colleagues to make sure we get a solution. So it was nothing about urging her not to whistleblow.
And she responds, you say, on the 30th of November, she hasn't got these emails anymore. I agree with what you are saying and I'm happy to follow your advice. Her email states, I'm happy to comply with your request to wait. Now, why didn't you produce the emails to us? Just quote them.
My apologies, I had assumed you already had them, so
no, we don't.
That's certainly an oversight on my part. I'm sorry, I didn't realise.
Yes, I mean, because there are further emails, you say, in January and December that you haven't, you've said exists, but you haven't provided. I
didn't realise that, so my apologies.
Yeah, no, we don't have them. I'd be grateful if you could supply them. Yes. I can undertake you, we won't bundle them without redacting them first. And so, because the difficulty is, without seeing them, we can't see the full context of what you said, can we?
No, that's fine. Certainly I agree with that.
Now, I need to put to you Dr. Redding's conclusion, which I don't know whether we're going to be able to put this on the screen of her statement, but it's Dr. Redding's statement from her hearing bundle, page 135, paragraph 212. I might just have to read it to you. It's quite short. During the whole process, there was no recognition or understanding of the stress experienced by the whistleblowers. We were treated as troublemakers throughout. I thought of giving up on several occasions. How do you respond to that observation by Dr. Redding?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that she felt that way, but certainly we were trying to take on board her concerns as part of that whole process. And there was significant effort made by a significant number of people within the board to try and support her and to communicate with her.
She makes the observation that we, by which she means the whistleblowers then, were treated as troublemakers throughout. How do you respond to the suggestion that the way that Dr. Peters is discussed in the stage 2 report is suggestive of the fact that people were treating them as troublemakers?
I think I've described that in the sense of trying to understand the context of the overall situation. I can't really add anything more to that.
Do you see how, now reading the stage 2 report, Dr. Redding and Dr. Peters might see that as an example of them being thought of as troublemakers?
I guess they might not be I guess they might see that as being an issue, yes.
Yes. I wonder if I can turn to a report that emerged, I think, just after you left, which is I'm not going to take you to the report, I'll take you to the press statement that accompanies it. The HIS report into the A&E consultants
Yes.
whistleblowing. Now, the report is addressed on page 48 of your. Sorry, not page 48, my page numbers are out. It's page 50 of your statement, the top of the page. And we asked you, we put to you, so page 50, sorry. We put to you the conclusion that there was a lack of compassionate, respectful, and positive leadership at all levels of the organisation, especially in responding to concerns raised by staff. Now, that isn't actually a quote from the report, Ms. Grant. I need to put this in the record. That's actually a quote from the press statement that was issued on the website of Health Improvement Scotland. And that's now, for completeness, in Bundle 52, Volume 7, Document 50, page 450. I don't propose to go to it because we quoted it here. And you respond, it's clearly of concern when issues such as those in the HIS report are raised. Considerable efforts are made to ensure staff felt supported, but further work required to be taken to address the concerns raised. And then you say, particular pressures exist in relation to emergency departments across NHS Scotland, and these pressures may need to be considered in a different manner to those elsewhere in the hospital to ensure due attention is paid to the particular complexities of the area. I wondered whether, looking at this report and what conclusions it reaches, whether the inquiry would be entitled to see it as consistent with a view that the treatment of the whistleblowers that we've discussed in the Queen Elizabeth saw them as wasn't compassionate or respectful in a response to the concern raised by staff, that actually it corroborates Dr. Peters and Dr. Inks's concern and Dr. Redding's concern.
So I think in an organisation the size of Greater Glasgow and Clyde, there will be areas within the board where, I mean, each hospital has a kind of, and even within that, wards and so on have different kind of pressures, different approaches they have. I mean, the emergency department pressures are quite different from those which are described in this inquiry and the issues. I think one of the things that I thought when I saw that was it was around how do we ensure that the voices of everyone is heard, not just the docs, it's the nurses as well and so on, because within the ED departments there were some concerns from nursing staff about how some of their colleagues were operating. And so we were trying to manoeuvre or work our way through the difficult dynamics of some of those issues. So I think it's difficult to read across similarities. They are quite different, the circumstances. And in an organisation the size of Glasgow and Clyde, you will have pockets of areas which we do need to work harder with. And the ED departments particularly have particular challenges because of the volume of patients coming, because of the fact that we need to treat people as in patients within a particular time frame, and that there is a public expectation that they will be. And within some of these departments there's a variance into a variation of approaches to whether they think the time is appropriate or whether other things are more important. So
doesn't this ultimately end up at the floor of the door of the corporate management team? Because whether it's this particular HIS investigation concern or the concern arising out of the Queen Elizabeth, ultimately, when you get to stage 2 of the whistleblowing process, it's on the desk of the medical director, the chief operating officer, the director of public health, because that's how the health board set up. And so is it not the case that these cultural issues are set from the top down in a great degree?
Yeah, that's true, but you don't have, it's quite hard to have one culture in a board the size of Glasgow and Clyde. I mean, the issues in the Queen Elizabeth are quite different from those in Inverclyde, and the whole atmosphere is quite different. So, and I just use them as examples, but So I think it is important, and the corporate management team made some significant efforts to address some of those issues. You know, we during a period of incredibly difficult period for the board, and we set out to do investors and people. And I set that out and asked colleagues to do that when I first came back to Glasgow, in order to ensure that we had processes, structured processes in place across the board, to make sure that people at a local level were having the opportunity to contribute. And I'm pleased to say, and I've said it in the statement, that actually, despite the COVID issues and despite all the other issues, we did manage to achieve that for the acute sector during the period for which I was the chief exec. So I think, and there was also a lot of initiatives around civility saves lives and so on. And I'm not saying that there's just not more to do, but I think the board can demonstrate that they made quite significant efforts, and the corporate management team made quite significant efforts to deal to ensure that the environment that people were supported.
So, I suppose to wrap this topic up, how would you respond to the suggestion that if we effectively have two examples in different contexts of whistleblowers feeling they weren't heard, one in Queen Elizabeth arising out of infection control, and one in the A&E department arising out of different factual circumstances, if both of them feel that the organisation is not listening and responding, does that not raise the question about whether the organisation is responding well and encouraging whistleblowing?
So I think in all of these situations that the key thing is to look at what has emerged and to actually move forward in terms of making sure that the issues that have been raised are being addressed, and that we redouble our efforts to ensure that people are supported.
You've mentioned moving forward a few times, and you obviously think it's important. How can you move forward from a situation if you don't know how you got to be in the place you're in?
Well, we know what the situation is at the moment in any situation, and therefore, and what the issues are that are of concern to people, and therefore, what do the facts say to support that of the current situation, and therefore, how do we address our efforts in terms of going forward to ensure that the issues that are being raised and the outcomes, which is really quite important here, and the impact is being acknowledged and addressed.
But I think to wrap up this section, if in fact, I'd probably wrap it up by reference to an observation by Professor Cudahy. And he tells us in his statement, paragraph 278, that he said this to you and Professor Brown, and no need to put it on the screen, that in a sense, if you can't withstand scrutiny internally, how can you withstand it externally? And so would you accept that there was an issue with understanding internal scrutiny in the health board arising out of the Queen Elizabeth incident?
With accepting internal scrutiny?
Yeah.
Could you just clarify what?
So effectively, the point I think he might be making is that when there were people who were raising issues internally from 2015, 2017, and through, we'll get to the rest, through to 2019, the health board wasn't good at listening to those criticisms if they were not, in a sense, something that people wanted to hear. You weren't good at listening as an organisation to criticisms by whistleblowers, and in that period from 15 onwards.
So I think there was a process whereby issues that were raised through the whistleblowing process, and I think I've said it in my statement, the actions that were required to be taken from them, there was a process in the board to ensure that those actions were addressed. And when you go to the whistleblowing report that was on the chair commissioned a review of the whistleblowing process.
From Mr. Vincent?
Yes, and from a retired HR director, so it was both of them. Then they looked at that, and there were some recommendations from that to improve the situation, and we dealt with them, and we have embedded them into the organisation. And the whistleblowing champion, in this case Mr. Vincent, but it's now someone else, has got that external scrutiny as well to make sure that issues are getting dealt with. And during my time at the beginning of this, the whistleblowing champion was a different person. And they did raise with me some issues, you know, that if things weren't getting done, nothing to do with this inquiry, but then why were they not progressing? So there is some, so it's not just a case of not actioning things that come from whistleblowing. There was a review done which was commissioned by the chair, and was visible through the board committees. There were recommendations from that and they were dealt with. And as part of that, there was discussion, as I recall, with the people who had whistleblown, whatever, to actually see their view of the world. So the board was trying hard to actually deal with some of those issues. And as I say, within that, there's not a huge amount of whistleblowing, but there are some, and you've picked out two of them, but there are, a number of others.
This whistleblowing review, did it speak to all the stage 3 whistleblowers? There were 2 of them. Did it speak to both of them?
I don't remember exactly the ins and outs of it. I don't.
If it didn't speak to one of them, what would that say about the board's attitude to learning about whistleblowing? If it only spoke to one of the 2 stage 3 whistleblowers in that review?
Well, I think it spoke to, I don't know exactly who it spoke to, but it certainly spoke to a number of whistleblowers.
Let's move on to the water incident. So you deal with this on page 55 of your statement. And you refer to in your answer to a briefing note that was prepared for you by the medical director, and that is bundle 27, volume 8, document 13, page 69. And it's on the 15th of March, 2018. Page 69 with a bit of luck. Next page. Thank you. Now, firstly, it appears to have come from Marianne Kane. Was she the interim director of estates?
She was, yes.
She was, right. And she'd just taken over from Mr. Loudon.
She was in an interim position for a few months in 2018.
Yes. So if we look at this report, I'm not going to go into it in great detail. I just want to really just check in with you about whether at this point in March, so it's early in the water incident, you understood this to be a local incident toward 2A or a wider issue across the Children's Hospital, or even wider than that?
I think there was a high degree of uncertainty about what was actually going on, whether it was the water at all or whether it was. But at that point, I recall that we thought it was around 2A.
Yes. And then were you told about the request of support from Health Protection Scotland and Health Facility Scotland on the 16th of March 2018?
I probably was, but I can't.
I mean, there's a minute of a teleconference, bundle 14, volume 2, page 107, and I'll show it to you because it gives you the names who was involved. That might help. 107. So if we just look at the top of the page, we see Mr. Steele, Professor Steele is involved. Mr. Hoffman has become involved on the phone call. And then we see Annette Rankin from HPS and Claire Cameron from HPS and Jim McMenamin from HPS. So there's a good turnout. What I wondered was to what extent you would have been aware that help had been requested from HPS and HFS for the water incident.
Yeah, I probably was.
Is there I mean, you think you might have answered this already, but just to keep it in context, why is help requested now on water in March 18 when it wasn't requested the previous year on ventilation?
Because at this point there had been issue. There was a perception that there had been patients who were part of an IM&T to actually move forward.
So because there were infections, that's what part of the reason.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and we were very clear and we were very concerned about what were the issues and how could we deal with them as soon as we could. So it was really, really important that if there were colleagues with expertise that we didn't have, where we're taking on board the issues that they would suggest were hugely important. So that's why there was an early engagement with those colleagues.
What I want to do is just move on to the water technical group. Now, this first met on the 6th of April, and we can just see its membership, bundle 10, document 1, page 5. And I just wonder whether you were aware of the water. It was actually it was rather unhelpfully sometimes called the water review meeting and sometimes the water technical meeting. And of course, you held a later water review meeting in September. So this is the Mary Ann Kane water technical group, if we can call it that. Were you aware that this had been set up and was beginning to work?
I think I was, yes. I think I was.
Because if we look at the minutes of the second and third meeting, and we go to page 9 of this bundle.
Just give me the bundle number again.
So, sorry, my lord, 10, bundle 10, we're going to documents 2 and 3. So this is a meeting on 13th of April, at the second meeting of what becomes the water technical group. If we go on to the next page, page 10, and you see in the middle of the page, just above poof, it was noted that every floor had positive and negative readings, thereby this would indicate a widespread water infection. Although this seems to be just outlet testing at this point. And then if we go on to page 14, which is the next meeting, bottom of the page, way forward, every floor is showing some contamination with various species, so we can assume there's a widespread contamination in the buildings. A review of the commissioning data indicates there was TVC, total viable counts, which were off the scale, but now we need to determine the way forward and solution to the contamination. What I'm wondering is, to what extent were you briefed in April 2018 about these sorts of conclusions?
Yeah, I think it was at that point we weren't entirely sure what was happening, and there was a huge amount of work going on to see what was happening and where the issues had come. So I wouldn't have been involved in the detail of every single bit, but I certainly would have been briefed on some of the issues that were emerging.
Or the scale of it? That'd be
probably
fair.
I don't recall, but probably. Because
at question 38, so that's back to your statement, page 55, we asked you about the water incident debrief meeting and perhaps more importantly, the full incident management team report. So we see at question 38, halfway down the page, we ask you about 2 documents. And your response is, I was briefed by the medical director on the issues being considered. I recall being told there was learning identified over a range of issues and that colleagues were committed to ensuring that learning was addressed. And then during May, June 18, HPS were working with NHS GGC and there had been no new cases since April. As the framework had been revoked, NHS no longer had the lead role and was working closely with colleagues in HPS and over the page and the policy unit of the Scottish Government. Now, you were in stage 2 at this point of the escalation?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that during stage 1, 2 and 3 and indeed 4, the health board still is responsible for its own actions?
Yes, but in a different way at level 4.
But at level 2, it wouldn't. Is it fair to say that GGC no longer had the lead role?
It should probably say no longer had the exclusive lead role, if you know what I mean. Right. That should probably, or whatever the words are, if you know what I mean, the single lead role.
So I realise that we're only a matter of weeks before the DMA Canyon report arrives with Professor Steele at your office.
Yes.
But at this point, is this a point where the chief executive should think, I need to step in, things aren't working properly? Because we now have learnt there are problems of some seriousness with the water system, and we learnt last year there were problems with the ventilation system.
So I think the problems with the water were more more acute in the sense of we had patients who had infections. And so I think the situation is different.
I understand that, but if you add the two together, does that not tend to suggest that there is something to investigate about the way the hospital's been run for the last few years?
I think we were more trying to look at how, you're not going to like this, but how to move forward and how to, address the issues that had emerged, rather than seeing as part of that. I mean, when we were in March 18 and so on, and in that 18 period, we were really trying hard to get to grips with what had happened, and we weren't entirely sure what was actually causing this. I mean, the hypothesis from the IMT was this, but it wasn't, because the tasks that were getting done were actually not leading to the desired outcome. So we were completely focused on trying to address those issues because of the impact on the patients.
Did you still have confidence in the people who were doing the investigation? So the interim director of state, the medical director, the chief operating officer, Dr. Inkster, those people, did you have confidence they had it under control?
I think within infection control issues, I mean, over my experience of many years, then quite often there isn't a single, it's not a case of if that has been identified, that's the issue, and if you do X, then that'll be fixed. That's not my experience of how infection control works in a lot of areas and a lot of times. So I believe that they were doing everything they could to look at what the data was telling them, what the issues were. We had involved HPS and HFS, as you say. We were involving public health and some of the colleagues within that, and we were trying to deal with what was emerging. So I think the complete focus was on trying to address those things through the normal processes of IMT.
But you didn't, but given, I'll come back to this again, and I suspect we'll get the same answer, but I appreciate why. Given that in the autumn of that year, you and Professor Steele will start the investigation that leads to the ACOM report and a greater understanding of what happened, did you have any thought at this point in the spring of setting somebody to do something like Mr. Leeper's investigation on water and ventilation, actually find out what's going on with the building?
I think we were more focused on trying to deal with the issues that were emerging from the IMT.
Now, if we go to the I want to ask you a question that will sound as if it's a technical question, but it's deliberately, I'm not being technical. It's about use of language. So if we go to, we just looked at the water technical group, which has used the word contamination quite frequently about what they found. And if we look at the HPS May 2018 report, Annette Rankin's report, Bundle 7, Document 11, page 3, and then we go, and that's from 31st of May 2018, and we go to page 10, and you look at the hypotheses, and it's concluding that they think the source of the cause of the widespread contamination, middle of the page, is a combination of hypothesis B, regressional contamination, and C, contamination at installation and commissioning. Now, what I want to understand here is use of language. In 2018, the Water Technical Group of Health Board employees, HPS, HFS, and this report by HPS seemed happy to describe what was then being found as contamination, widespread or otherwise. What's wrong with using that word to describe what they were seeing?
It's up to them how they would describe it in that sense.
Yeah, but now, when we talk about this issue, there's a view advanced that we shouldn't call it contamination because contamination is limited to things that are foreign to a water supply. So if there's something like building waste, that's contamination. Something like fecal waste, that's contamination. But something that you get there in small quantities isn't contamination. We get into a semantic debate. Given that of the you chief executive of the health board until January, have you got any issue with us discussing what was found in 2018 by use of the word contamination, using your own staff as the source of that description?
I think, I mean, things have moved on quite a lot since then, and as part of that, there was a view at that time that there was contamination, whatever the word is. I think things have moved on quite a lot with some of the reports and so on. And what, I mean, there has been, and I've been around this with my team a few times, you know, the water supply is never sterile, it's never sterile. And therefore, what are the things that we should be looking at? And what are the normal things that should be monitored, and what are the things that now, in hindsight, going forward, might be monitored a different way? So at that time, that was the view of HPS. And I think the other thing is...
Wasn't it also the view of Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board?
It was the view that was likely one of the hypotheses, yes. And also, I think it's important to recognise that within the Infection Control Manual, the IM&T has a degree of autonomy itself. And
I'm not looking at the IM&T, I'm looking at the Water Technical Group.
Oh, right, sorry, my apologies.
So the Water Technical Group are the people who describe it as contamination.
Yes.
That's your staff,
yes.
Your interim director of estates. Does that not mean that's where it ends? We can use that phrase without being criticised.
We were certainly trying to, and that was the view at that time.
Right, and you think it's somehow changed?
I think things have moved on, and there are other issues that need to be considered now.
So, admittedly from a high level position, what's your understanding of whether there was widespread contamination in the water system in 2018, in the spring?
I think there were issues with the water system. I think the issue is, what impact did they have on patients? Was it a routine level of issues, or were there other things? And I think it's incumbent on
just to check, you think that it's possible that the amount of contamination in that water system was routine?
No, I'm saying that as part of that, I can't remember the question you asked me. So
the question is, are you accepting or disagreeing with the idea that in April 2018, there was widespread contamination in the water system of the Queen Elizabeth? Do you accept that, or do you say there's some evidence that suggests the contrary?
So certainly at that time, the view was that there was contamination in the system.
Yeah, I understand that. But what's your view now?
I think it's less clear now about what contamination there was, but I do think there was something in the and we wouldn't have spent the amount of money we have and the amount of effort and so on to try and deal with that if we hadn't thought there was contamination in the system. Or
yeah, because I mean, putting aside for the impact of whether the infections were unusual, usual,
yes,
high, low, putting that to one side, just focusing on whether the water itself, how we describe the water system, your staff described it as widespread contamination in 2018. Yes. Are you now saying that we shouldn't use that phrase?
No, I didn't say that. You suggested that.
Okay. Let's look at how these events were reported to the board. Sorry, Rod.
Ms. Grant, did I note you correctly as saying, I do think there was something, or did I not note you correctly?
Yes, we thought at that time there was issues, and that's why we put on the point of use filters and we put on the chloride dioxide dosing and so on, and we did think there was issues there, and that's why we spent money on doing those things and trying to do. It's really important to think, you know, that everything that was raised we tried to deal with. So if the hypothesis was X in the water, and we saw infections in children, then we didn't wait to think about whether that was whether the hypothesis would change, whatever. We actually took action right away to try and deal with the things that were emerging very quickly.
I wonder if we can go to page 56 of your questionnaire, which is question 39. We asked you, well, we asked you two questions, but you've answered the second one. It's the one I'm interested in. How were the board kept up to date as this incident progressed? And you said regular updates were given to the appropriate subcommittees of the board and the board itself. The issues were reported to CCGC in December 17, March 19, and June 21. I'm confused as to how CCG could receive a report in December 17 from the water incident that started in March 2018. Could that be a mistake?
Yeah, probably. I'd need to go and look at that, but it probably was.
Because what I found was a report to CCGD on 12th of June 2018. And I wonder if we can go and look at that. And that would make sense, I suppose, in terms of the report from Dr. Inkster has come in, the report from Ms. Rankin's come in, this technical group has met. Bundle 38, document 7, page 44. Sorry, yes, page 44. Now, on this occasion, sometimes, yes, page 44. So this meeting on 12th of June, and we notice that Dr. Inkster is present along with Ms. Kane for item 8, which is the one we're going to look at. And if we go to page 47, it's described as the review of water incident at the Queen Elizabeth. And there is a minuted report of Dr. Inkster's involvement. Now, we don't have a copy, at least I can't find. May end up looking very silly. My colleagues tell me about it in the next half hour. The report, the written report, but it does rather read from this as it might have been a verbal report from Dr. Inkster. And again, going back to the reporting process to the board, this minute doesn't say that the hypothesis at that point from HPS and from the IMT and the Water Technical Group was of contamination either during installation or regressional contamination. And so I'm wondering, is this the only way that this incident was being reported to the board itself, i.e. in a minute of a draft minute, which this one's never actually been approved, draft minute of the Clinical Care and Governance Committee?
So the minute, and I'm just reading this, sorry, as you're speaking, but the minute says that there was a widespread problem. Right?
Yes, it does.
And then it also talks later down about significant contamination.
But it doesn't talk about the cause. But even if it does, is this the only report to the board in that late summer, spring period?
So to the board itself, then quite often what happened, and someone would need to check this, that board seminars were used to update on what was happening. So therefore, there might have been
a board seminar.
Well, the beginning of a board seminar might have described it would have described some of the issues that were going on, and then quite often as well, the chair asked for an update to be sent round board members of what was if there were things that were coming that were of importance. He asked for a note to be sent round board members, as well as the debate at the Clinical Care Governance Committee, which is where the larger discussion would take place.
What I'm just wanting to be clear is that at this point, of course, there was considerable public disquiet around these events. Yes. Fair to say.
Yes.
And I think there's an observation that's been made by a number of the families that they weren't seeing reports of this issue in the main board papers. Now, they may have been coming up through this route or through seminars, but would you accept that part of the sort of public accountability of a health board is to show that you are taking an interest in something as opposed to just taking an interest in it and acting?
So I think that minute describes, and I appreciate it's at the Clinical Care Governance Committee as opposed to the board, that the board is not the right term, that the organisation was taking this incredibly seriously.
Right.
And that we were really trying hard to do that. And as I say, the whole point of having discussion at the Clinical Care Governance Committee is to make sure there is enough time, because the board has not got much time, there's a lot of issues at the board, and that these issues were fully discussed at the Clinical Care Governance Committee, where there could be quite a lot of detailed scrutiny. And that minute, I think, shows that the at least the breadth or the amount of discussion there was at the meeting, because in the board itself, it wasn't really easy to do that because of the volume of business.
I mean, I appreciate that this is a trite point that I'm going to make, but is there an issue about Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board being just too large to deal with these issues?
I think there is a structured a delegated approach, which I've tried to say this today, and perhaps not as well as I might.
No, you have, I think, very successfully explained the delegated process and the structure.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering whether a lot of your answers are that there was lots going on. It's a big health board. There were many, many issues. We were trying to deal with it. We were trying to move forward. And what I'm suggesting is that might it be that part of the weakness is that this health board is so large, actually it hasn't got time to deal with, to some extent, crises that emerge in a way that, with hindsight, one might hope they would be dealt with. The board, not the institution.
Yeah, I think you'd need to be clear about what your expectation of a board is, as opposed to a, those. I can't remember the number in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, but say 30 people for the purpose of this. Yeah. That's the board. I mean, there are in all boards, and when I was in Forth Valley, it was a much smaller board, but you have a range of experience, a range of approaches to things, and I think the approach that's been adopted in Glasgow and Clyde to try and address what you've said is that the quite a lot of the detailed discussion goes on at committee level.
Right.
I think has been quite successful, and certainly it's not. You don't go to these committees and the non-execs just accept what you say. There's quite a lot of challenge, and it might not look like that from the minute and so on, but there's certainly quite a lot of challenge, quite a lot of issues that the board members are not content with, on occasions, and quite a serious expectation on the executives that they would deal with things that have been raised by the non-executives. And as I've said somewhere in all this, those points are put onto a rolling action list or whatever, and the chair of the subcommittee ensures that they're done, and if they're not done to their satisfaction, then they request further work.
I want to move on to the emergence of the DMA Canyon L8 risk assessments. But before I do that, I've been asked to ask a couple of questions about the Ward 4B works that took place, resulting in it reopening in the summer of 2018. What awareness did you have of the nature and the extent of the works that were being carried out for 4B?
I would have had an awareness of the generality of it, but depends what you mean. Did
you know that what was being done would not actually bring it up to the standards set out in SHTM 0301?
No, I don't think I would have known that level of detail.
It's just that one of the striking things is that there's an options paper to Acute Services Committee which looks at various things. We've looked at an early draft of it. And one of the options is to go into the old space, 4B, where it was always going to be.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, it can't achieve 10 air changes.
Yeah.
It can only achieve 6.
Yeah.
As a consequence, the corridor is not HEPA filtered. Now, you can get into a debate about whether that's important, but is it not slightly troubling that the chief executive wouldn't have been aware of that reality?
I think the difficulty I have in some of this is I just really can't remember what you're asking me, and I appreciate that, and I really don't want to look as if I'm not. But I knew that the ventilation, as I've described before, would have difficulty in complying with the SHTMs because of some of the issues we've discussed.
That being the building was designed for something less.
Yes. And what were the options to try and move forward? And there was judgment made by colleagues about how to how we could improve the situation as best we could, and also what the impact on patients would be, and were there any increased infections or were there any issues around that that we would have to take.
So effectively, there's been a balanced judgment made by colleagues, and you, possibly even before you arrived, if I understand your evidence correctly, and you effectively think, well, that's been done, that's good, they can do it.
Yes, and colleagues would have given me that advice. So the people who understand these things better than I would have given me that advice to say, you know, this is acceptable or no, it's not.
Thank you. Let's go back to 2018 and the DMA Canyon report. You've explained how they came to your attention in questions 40 and 41. So that starts on page 56, and I won't go over in question 40 on page 56 how you heard about them. I heard about it in some detail from Professor Steele, but we've got your version of events there. What was your reaction about when you learnt of these reports?
Yeah, I was quite shocked, is probably the word, and anxious that those things were in the reports and they hadn't been addressed.
Why were you shocked?
Because the report said that some things had been raised in 2015 and hadn't been dealt with. And that the second report, which I think we got, although it's dated 17, I think it was earlier in 18 that it appeared, that some of the things that had been there before were not.
Had not been addressed.
Some of them had, but some of them had not.
I'm sorry to sort of press on this, but why is it shocking that that wasn't dealt with?
Because there was a report which was generated by an external company at that time, and all of the issues hadn't been fully dealt with.
And so
and we were in the middle of a water
situation.
So as part of that, so we have a water situation which is impacting on patients, and that was the hypothesis at that time. And we have a report which says these things need to be done, and or there was issues that had, and I was concerned about that.
And did you see any connection between what you'd been told about the conclusions of HPS and the Water Technical Group and the IMT about the water incident and the DMA Canyon report?
Well, I didn't map across all the issues, but what I did was say, right, well, if those are the things that DMA Canyon, who have the expertise on this area, say that are important to this, then we must make sure they're all done as soon as we can.
So you mentioned on the next page, page 57, that you asked Mr. Leeper to assess the reports and why they hadn't been made available.
Yes.
What I want to do is to look at one of the conclusions of them. So if we go to bundle 6 and we go to the reports, which they're actually broken up into documents 34 to 40, but we go to page 150. I've gone the wrong place, sorry. Might be a different bundle. Take me a moment. Yes, it's bundle 8, sorry. Document 34. Go to page 150. And if we look on page 152, we have the high-level findings. And do you see at 2.7, one of the conclusions is operational preparedness and readiness at handover. I appreciate that is at handover in 2015 when you weren't here. The board's estates team was relatively small and inexperienced. Despite their huge effort, it's clear they were overwhelmed by the wave of demand. they worked extremely long hours over a protracted period of time, and their overall contribution to sustaining the function of the hospital should not be underestimated. Do you accept that one of the sort of broad conclusions from Mr. Leaper is something to do with resource levels for estates?
Certainly, due to the amount of, I think I described them as snagging before, but they might not be, that might be appropriate. The volume of work that had to be addressed by the estates team was difficult in that period after handover.
And they may not have had sufficient resources at the time.
It's hard to see whether they did or not, but they certainly had a huge amount of work that they weren't anticipating. So if it had been a steady state, that's a different thing from where they found themselves.
Now, if we go back to your statement and we go to question 42, so that's page 57, the question's at the bottom of the page. How were the board kept informed of developments in respect to the DMA Canyon reports? And what mechanisms were in place to update the board in respect to the progress being made addressing the recommendations and the authorising engineer Water? And you say, following receipt of the reports, I spoke to the medical director and made her aware of their existence. She in turn ensured they were brought to the attention of the infection control team. Over the page. Page 58, please. I'll be including the ICD. On the 3rd July 2018, the board were updated the board seminar on the position regarding these reports. An action plan was drafted and colleagues within the estates and our facilities addressed the outstanding matters as a matter of urgency. Now, if we go to bundle 27, document 8, volume 8, sorry, document 7.1, we're going to look at the board seminar at page 57. That's the review, the brief for the review of the commissioning of maintenance of the water system. I'm assuming that's the brief, effectively the background paper for the board seminar.
I'm assuming so.
Yes, and if we look at the
presentation as well,
we look at the presentation on the next page, on page 58, we have a presentation by Dr. Armstrong. Do you remember the presentation by Dr. Armstrong?
I remember the fact that there was one, but I don't remember the detail. No, I mean I've read it since then. But
yes, I mean at the point of the seminar, had you read parts of the DMA Canyon report?
The DMA Canyon report was pretty technical.
It's a pretty big document.
A big pardon?
It's a pretty big document.
Yeah, and it's also got a lot of things in it that I'm not qualified to say whether they're right or wrong. What I was concerned about was the amount of things that they had identified as needing done.
But you'd read it at the time to see what they were, to be concerned.
I mean, I didn't read it, but I certainly had familiarised myself with the content.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was Dr. Armstrong evidence that she actually hadn't read it before she made this presentation. Are you aware of that?
Probably wasn't her who I don't know the answer to that, but
Well, but were you aware that she hadn't read it?
I don't think so, no. But in terms of the presentation, Jennifer would have been, or sorry, Dr. Armstrong would have been the person who was presenting this, I assume, around the issues because of the infection control issues at that time. But it wouldn't be reasonable to expect her to know the ins and outs of the day. That's not, it would be the technical estates.
But you reviewed it, sufficient to be worried.
Aye, at a level. But so in terms of the issues within it, I think it's reasonable that she would expect that estates people would have looked at the importance of some of those issues, because when I read it, I wasn't sure what was the really big ticket issues and what weren't. I mean, you could see which ones weren't compliant is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. So
you can see the ones that were flagged red in the risk register.
Yes, but apart from that, I think her expectation would have been that the estates guys would have done that, and I think that is how it would normally work.
Obviously, Mr. Leaper wrote his report and focused on the actions of the estates people who received the report, what they did and didn't do.
Yes.
Do you see any issues about the work of the water safety group and what it was doing in the sense that it was not aware that there wasn't an appointed person or an authorising engineer, that it wasn't aware there needed to be a risk assessment for a new building. Did you consider that to be of an issue?
So I'm not sure if they weren't aware or it just hadn't been done, if you know what I mean, because within the board area, those things had been dealt with in other.
Yes, they had been in other places.
So I'm not sure whether the group that you're referring to assumed that it was in place because of the fact that it was in place in the other parts of the board, if you know what I mean. So
why would you be entitled to assume that a new hospital has a fully set up team of authorised person, authorising engineer?
Because I assume they would read over from those who had been there in the old Southern General or wherever.
Isn't that not quite a big assumption, Ms. McCann? It's a new hospital. It's 700 whatever million pounds or 1,300 rooms. Should there not be some thought at the board water safety group level that we need to proactively make sure this system is set up right to start off with?
I think that the water safety group should have assured themselves of that. Yes, I agree with that. But I also think that the Estates and Facilities colleagues should have made sure that the arrangements were in place.
No doubt that's the case. Right. If we think back to the water incident, so we step away from DMA Canyon for a moment. The water incident started in March. In May, people thought it was over, but sadly it wasn't. Who in the board was taking control of its response to the water incident in the Schiehallion unit in 2018? What bit of the board structure was in charge?
But, sorry, could you repeat that question?
So what bit of the board structure, person, committee, team, was in charge of the board's response in the water incident from March through to decant?
The IM&T was in the driving seat of the issues.
What was the extent of the IMT's authority?
So they are. It's not absolutely clear cut in the sense of it. I mean, you've talked a bit in my sort of about the decanting. If there had been a basic bog standard decanting, then those things happen all the time, and you wouldn't expect, senior colleagues to be involved in that. But in some instances where there's a bigger impact or there's more significant issues, then they were. So, they had authority to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if there were some senior managers on those IM&Ts as well, and their job would have been to highlight any that had significant implications. And the chair of the IM&T role is quite pivotal in this, in making sure that they are clear to their line management that these are the issues.
I mean, would you accept there's more to the water incident than the investigation and the work of the IMT? There was more bits of team, or other institutions, bits of the structure working on the issue.
Yes.
Yeah, so there was a water technical group.
Yes.
And then there was a communication subgroup.
Yes, and there was and the local team, the local management team as well would have been involved.
Yeah, and there's managing Schiehallion. And would the corporate management team have had discussions about this incident as the summer went on?
Yeah, they would have.
Yes. And would the clinical care and governance committee be the right people to be in charge of this sort of thing?
So the clinical care governance team are an assurance committee.
Yes.
So
they're not in charge in that sense. They're not executive.
I mean, they can't do it if they're holding me to account, if you know what I mean. So,
I understand.
So they have to be content or otherwise with the actions that are in place, as opposed to doing it. They wouldn't do it.
What about the board infection control committee? Could they have been in charge?
No, they weren't in charge. It was more the IM&T. It was more the IM&T.
Right, because
I mean, they also can commission bits of work, and if they're concerned, they would ask for additional things. But it would generally be through that more operational.
What I want to do is look at your answer to question 43. So that's on page 59 of your bundle, of the statement bundle. And in fact, we probably ought to start a little bit further back on the previous page. B, Dr. Inkster has given evidence as lead ICD and chair of the Water Incident IMT that she proposed the establishment of an executive control group to provide director level oversight. Now I'm going to come back to that, so I'll ask you just to park that for a moment. And then we mentioned for the first time the water review group, which you discuss in your next question, because this question is a supplementary question. So if we go over the page, you say, my understanding is that a water review group was established to ensure that all aspects of the issue that had been raised was being addressed. This group was chaired by the chief operator and met during 2018 to ensure actions were being progressed. Was it effectively the water review group, the higher level executive group dealing with the board's response to the water incident?
My recollection is it was principally around trying to make sure that there was progress on the recommendations within the DMA reports and therefore their implications for the situation, rather than taking charge. They didn't, I don't think, take charge of the, as you've described.
Because we then asked you to whom the water review group reported at sea, and you said it was a short-life working group to ensure progress. I do not recall whether there was a formal reporting mechanism, although progress was discussed and with key directors and myself. Now, to go back to the issue Dr. Inkster raised, that's the previous page, page 58, she has discussed proposing, perhaps they're not persisting with the proposal, what with all the events that were going on, the establishment of an executive control group to provide director level oversight of the incident. Was there any discussion of such a group in 2018? Or is the water review group effectively a somewhat more informal equivalent of it?
I'm not entirely certain, to be honest.
Because the point that I think Dr. Inkster makes is that, and to be fair, the inquiry's experts make a similar point, is that there is some value in having a single meeting that makes the key decisions around something as important as this water incident.
Yes.
How would you respond to that as an observation?
I think we were relying on the IMT to do that and to progress the issues. I think we were.
I mean, you later, with the oversight board, you had the gold command group.
Yes.
Do you see, wouldn't it have been better to have a gold command group and then the IMT is the silver command group, if I understand the difference between the two?
Yeah, one of the challenges in all this is that the infection control manual describes the fact that IMTs need to have a degree of autonomy, if I could call it that. And there is always a challenge between at what point do you step in and how do you lead, because they should have the experts to deal with the issue. And if you step in, then there is always the assertion perhaps that you're trying to take over the situation, where in the IMT you have the experts who should make the recommendations on anything of substance, and then we should take the recommendations, as opposed to, if you understand what I mean.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm wondering whether one way to manage such a fear or anxiety would be to have a clear structure so that the IMT knows that its recommendations will be taken to the Gold Command Group, the executive group.
I think one of the things that we do need to reflect on as we go forward is when there is a protracted issue,
yes,
call it that, then at what point do you, and I've thought about this quite a lot since all these things have happened, at what point does it have to switch from that normal, if I could call it that, IMT process to something quite different? And I think the answer to that, and I think we haven't bottomed that out, but it does need to be.
Well, I mean, so I suppose that gives me three options to put to you. One option is that you do it the way you did it. So you have an IMT which attempts to make decisions semi-independently throughout the incident, and in fact stops in the autumn of 18.
Yes.
And one of those decisions is to decant the Schiehallion unit, which is a big decision.
Yes.
And the other option is you still have the IMT doing its work, but it and the water technical group and the communications group are feeding into an executive control group, a gold command group, which has got probably, might have the chief operating officer, senior people of the board, including someone who knows about infection control, who can make sure that all the support that is needed for the IMT is provided and take responsibility for the really big decisions.
But the role of the chair of the IMT is to do that with support from the other people who are at the meeting. I think hindsight is a great thing, and I've spent a lot of my time, thinking about, well, how, what else could have been done, what should have been done, etc. And I think the IMT chair has the ability to seek resource or to do whatever, and also reports generally, if it's the lead ICD, to through Jennifer Armstrong. So they have got a conduit to senior people in the board pretty quickly.
But they've also got senior people on the board on their meetings, haven't they?
They have, yes. So therefore, that group in itself now, it's on some occasions it might have been a bit unwieldy and too many people.
So why were people like deputy medical directors and director of estates turning up at IMT?
Because of the seriousness of the issue.
So I'm wondering...
In some ways in this one, we'd be criticised if we didn't put those senior people on because you're not taking this seriously. On the other hand, why did you put them on? Because then you're curtailing the independence.
Well, no, I understand that.
So you're kind of between a rock and a hard place there, frankly.
So obviously I won't get to it till today. Tomorrow we will get to what happens in 2019, where I think tensions do get rather high.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if, looking at the benefit of hindsight, might it have been better for the management of this whole incident, this reaction to concerns about the Chehaline unit, if some point in the late spring, early summer, you would put in some sort of structure to effectively make it clear that when it came to a really big decision, you, the executive team, were ready, standing ready to make a decision, and then leave it the IMT to get on with doing the job it was doing and producing its recommendations.
But I think the IMT did have senior reps on it later, and at that point they were coming back and talking to, not perhaps in the formalised way you're describing, but they were certainly ensuring that the big issues were getting dealt with. So we did make a response. It wasn't a case of we just saying no. It didn't change as the process went on. But in hindsight, I think for prolonged issues like this, then there needs to be thought about how that might be managed. But we were trying to follow the Infection Control National Manual, because if we didn't do that, we would have been, so I think when times get difficult, it is really important to stick to the tried and tested processes as well, because that, in my experience, leads to, if you don't, then it leads to everybody with the best of intentions trying to do things, but getting in a bit of a difficult situation.
I think what I'll do, I'll just look at one more document before we finish up, which is the Water Review Group meeting on the that makes the decision, or might make the decision, we don't know, to decant the patients. And if we just look at that on bundle 19, document 35, page 614. So this is a draft meeting note of the water review meeting on the 18th of September at 8 a.m. And you are recorded as being present with Mr. Best, Mr. Leaper, Mr. Walsh, Ms. Kane, Dr. Armstrong, and Mr. Archibald. Now, reading that document through, is it fair to reach the conclusion that that was the group of people who decided, taking on board advice from the IMT, and indeed I think possibly Mr. Redfern's options paper, to go ahead with the decant of Ward 2A to another ward in the tower when it became available?
So I think some of the terminology of some of the meetings is kind of, I'm not sure they're all the same. You know, even if they're the same title, I think there might have been.
But this is a different water review meeting. This I'm assuming is your
water
one.
review groups. I think my recollection of how we decided was that it was clear from the ongoing issues that we weren't going to be able to do the amount of work that was being suggested with the patients continuing to be in the ward. And those patients, we were very sensitive to the fact that they were quite ill, and we wanted to make sure they were handled sensitively rather than staying in a ward where there was work going on and it wasn't appropriate for them. And as part of that, the IMT made a recommendation that, which was supported by the clinical staff, that we needed to find another ward. That we didn't make that recommendation. It made that we had to come out of that ward.
Yes.
And as part of that, then how would we ensure that an appropriate ward or an appropriate area for those patients to be treated was accommodated? So I think the executive team, with those people, but not exclusively those people, supported the recommendation of the IMT.
So this is one of the things I'm finding a little hard. And you've just said supported the recommendation of the IMT, and it may be that I'm just being too much of a lawyer here, so please stop me. Go to page 60 of your statement. We asked you at A, what person, committee or group made the September 18 decision to decant the patients? And you've stated in the answer, the first sentence, that it was the IMT recommended the decant. And you've listed the various people who were involved in the discussions. And a further discussion took place with various people. And the decant solution was agreed. And what I'm trying to find, and it may just because I'm a lawyer and I don't really understand healthcare management, is it really a hard question? Who, i.e. one person or a group of people, decided to decant the patients at the end, having taken advice of all the recommendations, taken soundings, been involved in discussions, who ultimately made the decision?
I think I've tried to answer that there. So the IMT did as I've suggested.
It's made a recommendation.
And then the Chief Exec Medical and Nurse Direct Chief Operating Officer, as well as the local team, said we should implement the recommendation of the IMT.
If we go back to the minute of the note of the water review meeting in bundle 19 that we were just looking at, go over the page 615. And we look at the first bullet point. Let's not look at that. Of decant of 2A and 4B. It was agreed that due to the biofilm being found in some sink areas in this ward and the patient demographic, it would be appropriate to decant this patient group to another area in order to carry out investigative works and get to the bottom of the problem. Is that this group of people, having received all the advice they've discussed, including the recommendation of the IMT, deciding to do the decant?
Yes.
Right. I think, Lord, this might be a good place to break for the end of the day. I have asked colleagues from the call participants that if anyone has any Rule 9 questions that relate to evidence that Ms. Grant has discussed today, they should let me know overnight so I can ask them first thing in the morning.
Ms. Grant, we'll take our break until tomorrow. Could I ask you to be back for a start at 10 o'clock?
Of course, yes. Thank you.
Well, and I wish everyone a good afternoon and evening, and we'll see each other, all being well, tomorrow.